following program is an original production of WYCC PBS Chicago.
Tonight, Illinois dramatically cuts back programs for mental health. Could that mean more gun violence?
Shockwaves from the Boston Marathon bombings resonating at outdoor events nationwide. Resilient Chicagoans give their thoughts.
Plus, the Chicago Teachers Union president sends a stern message to the mayor. Her new push into politics and her plan to make Rahm Emanuel a one-term mayor.
And medical marijuana now one step closer to legal in Illinois. These stories and more tonight on In the Loop. Good evening, I'm Barbara Pinto.
And I'm Chris Bury. Tonight we take an in-depth look at mental health and gun violence. Two topics linked in the headlines, but should they be?
And as we find out tonight, when it comes to curbing gun violence in Chicago, putting the blame on mental illness may be oversimplifying a critical issue.
I believe the government should focus on keeping firearms out of the hands of criminals and those with mental issues that could cause them to be a threat to our society.
But mental health professionals say it's not that easy. There is no reliable way to predict exactly who is likely to be violent. Plus, despite horrific mass shootings at a Newtown, Connecticut school and a Colorado movie theater, a report by the Institute of Medicine found that people with mental illnesses are responsible for no more than 5% of violent acts in the United States.
The media reports on violence, they just throw it all in the same pot. And so people are very confused about the various causes of violence.
Dr. Carl Bell, a psychiatrist who directs the Institute for Juvenile Research at the University of Illinois, Chicago, says fixing the gun violence problem goes far beyond just pouring more money into mental health programs. His prescription? Creating what he calls a social fabric, something Jane Addams did over 100 years ago in Chicago with the Hull House.
And what Jane Addams intuitively understood was that the community, the family, and the schools had to be the brakes and the steering wheel for rambunctious teenagers. She did that. The violence in Chicago in the Southern and Eastern European immigrant population stopped dead in its tracks.
Dr. Bell believes the same kind of formula is needed today in Chicago to reduce gang violence, domestic violence, robberies, and drug-related homicides. As a board member of the Chicago Department of Public Health, he had a hand in closing 6 of the 12 public mental health clinics operated by the city, a move that sparked vocal protests.
The so-called closure, which, I don't agree with that characterization of the mental health clinics, is not going to increase violence. Again, the violence is down 50% from what it was 10 years ago.
I think in the Woodlawn area and probably Auburn Gresham, you did see an increase in violence. And the city's response was, well, let's see, we'll get more cops.
Nadana Carter with the community organization called STOP for Southside Together Organizing for Power was one of those protesting the closures. While experts find no link between clinic closures and increased violence, her organization maintains there is a correlation between mental wellness and aggression that can cost lives. Nadana runs workshops at Chicago churches to educate ministers about mental health issues.
Because we recognize between Thursday and Sunday, ministry, whichever faith, works with more than 2 million people during those 4 days. They touch those lives.
When it comes to youth violence, Carter says it goes deeper than just fixing the gang problem with stepped-up policing. It requires a more holistic approach.
We're not going to blame the kids, because if I blame you, you're going to turn away. It's like if you're wearing your pants around your knees and I say, pick up your pants, you look stupid. Well, I've insulted you, I've offended you. I don't need to do that. I need to bring you along. I need to find out who is in your life that is making you believe that you're not worthy.
The solutions to the city's violence has not changed. It's just that different administrations come in and everybody's got to pretend like we need to reinvent the wheel so that current administration can get credit.
In the past 4 years, the state of Illinois has cut spending on mental health programs by $187 million, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Our state, #1 in the country in cuts to programs that treat mental illnesses. But in the wake of recent national gun debate, Governor Quinn says he wants to add $25 million to mental health programs. Joining us this week for the backstory is WBEZ reporter Tony Arnold. Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tony, you've been covering this issue closely. When it comes to the gun debate and the mental health debate, where are we missing the mark here?
I think we all know how contentious the gun debate has been between the two sides. You have groups like the NRA lobbying on one side and the anti-gun group on the other side. The mental health debate is where the two kind of actually have some common ground, where they both call for increase to funding for mental health programs. The issue with that is that a lot of the mental health groups, lobbyists that advocate on behalf of mental health industry, psychiatrists, say that while more funding for mental health programs is great and all, a lot of the debate has been off base. It's been for the wrong reasons. That's because a lot of people who have been clinically diagnosed with mental health issues are not violent. So while a lot of the headlines go toward why did these people who do these mass shootings, let's say, weren't they intercepted earlier? It's actually, that they're in the minority. Most people who have mental health issues are not violent.
Now, the NRA has put a lot of focus on this issue, and they've focused a lot on mental health. We'll take a look at a statement from Wayne LaPierre, the head of the National Rifle Association. This is from testimony before the Senate Judiciary Committee back in January, and he says, "We need to look at the full range of mental health issues, from early detection and treatment to civil commitment laws to privacy laws that needlessly prevent mental health records from being included in the background check system." Now, in your mind and in the reporting you've done, should those two things be linked based on what we know about how many people with mental illness who actually commit gun crimes?
Right. So I think a lot of what you're seeing from the NRA is more emphasis on not just treating mental illness, but making sure, the programs that are in place, like in Illinois, we have the FOID card system, making sure that those who shouldn't have access to guns don't. You're seeing that on both sides in Springfield right now. But what you're also seeing, I think, in the NRA also has kind of given like a little bit of a personal story on this issue too. The issue though is that in Springfield in particular, there hasn't been a lot of attention on this. Even they had a hearing a little while ago about guns and mental health, and while this preceded other issues like other hearings about gun control, banning assault weapons, massive crowds turned out for these hearings. There was a velvet rope set up for these to get in, and the lines were out the door to get in. When it came time to talk about mental health, though, there was nobody there. It was empty.
Nobody showed up?
Nobody showed up. It was you could there were any number of empty seats there. So while it hasn't just gotten a lot of attention in Springfield as it has in other places.
I mean, it seems this is more about guns than it is mental illness.
Yeah, so exactly. And you do have calls like from the governors saying that there should be more funding. We want to increase funding by $25 million this year. That's coming after several cuts. The state has closed clinics around Illinois. The city consolidated 6 of its 12 clinics. There was a clinic not too on the south side of Chicago that was closed. That was run by Dr. Carl Bell that we just heard from. So there's been a lot of closings, a lot of cutbacks to mental health programs. We'll see if the legislature actually does give the money that the governor says that he wants toward mental health programs this year. Is
that $25 million the governor wants to put toward mental health programs enough? And just talk about the state of mental health care in Illinois with all of these cutbacks. Who's most at risk here? A lot of that money is going to be going toward programs that already exist, not necessarily new programs. So while the governor does say, we want to see more $25 million, that's not going to be going toward reopening other clinics that have closed, but programs that already exist. This is such a nuanced issue when you look at mental health and guns and the places that they do intersect. And we look at laws that try to keep guns out of the hands of people who may be violent. When you look at some of these and the laws that are in place, how concerned are mental health advocates that mandatory reporting of their patients might drive people away from getting the help they need? Yeah, psychiatrists are very worried about this proposal. Cook County Sheriff Tom Dart has been the one proposing that there should be more reporting standards
for doctors who think that their patients may cause violence to themselves or to others. Psychiatrists and even those who have been clinically diagnosed with mental health problems say that that could really limit their trust in their doctors, what they say, if they know that that's going to be reported to the state. So there's a lot of issues with that. The legislators I've talked to have said that they really don't think that this is a good idea, that there's a lot of concern there, and the relationship between doctors and their patients really needs to be kept confidential.
It also makes you wonder, how does this square with HIPAA, the federal laws that guarantee medical privacy?
Yeah, and you know, part of also what they're trying to do in Springfield is there's several different types of gun violence. There's what Chicago sees on, you know, almost a weekly basis, but then there's also the mass shootings that get a lot of attention. Northern Illinois University comes to mind with that a few years ago, and so part of what they're trying to figure out is how to come up with these programs to treat not just the mass shootings, but also the violence that Chicago sees on a weekly basis.
And when you look at the laws that try to deal with this issue, I mean, who makes the determination? And is someone who's diagnosed with depression or obsessive compulsive disorder or anorexia put in a category that may require some reporting, or they're qualified as mentally ill, whereas someone who may not have something diagnosable could pick up a gun and commit violence?
And that goes back to why a lot of people in the mental health industry say that this entire conversation is flawed. Patients in particular are worried about stigma that goes along with associating mental illness with gun violence, because, as they like to say, not the majority of people with mental illness are not violent.
This is such a nuanced issue, and we've touched on a bit of it.
Yeah.
I wish we had more time, but Tony Arnold, thank you so much for your time. Many questions remain unanswered about the tragic attack at the Boston Marathon, but the bombings are on the minds of many here in Chicago. Here's Chris with some of the reactions of Chicagoans.
The Boston Marathon bombings have raised concern in big cities like Chicago. How can they protect the public at large open events such as marathons? The runners we spoke to are determined not to let terrorism ruin their sport.
Whoever it was that was responsible for it came along and tried to take something away from us. Try to take a wonderful, beautiful moment, celebration in Boston like Patriots Day, running the Boston Marathon, which is an international event, and they try to take it away from us. Try to make it something we're afraid of. Try to make it something that we don't want to participate in anymore. One of the reasons I'm running today is also just to show support for that, to show that we're not afraid to run. We're going to run, we're going to compete, we're going to do it on a big stage, we're going to do it out in the open, and we're not afraid of that.
We shouldn't be scared to change our ways of life just because of what they're trying to do. I mean, terrorists try to terrorize us by making us change what we do. So if we refuse to do that, then they kind of fail, you know?
I hope that people who are, running to stay fit, or even, running in these races, that sort of thing, I hope that doesn't affect their participation, because, in the end, whoever did this, they win, so I guess my feeling would be, keep on doing what you're doing, but maybe be a little bit more aware when you're out doing those different events and that sort of thing.
We have an inner strength as Americans here that we're going to live our lives, and we're not going to we're not going to live in fear, and we're going to go on doing what we always like to do. It's going to be a little harder every time. It's going to be a little tougher. May take a little more time, more back checks, and may cost us a little more in terms of security, but I think we're going to continue to do what we've always loved to do, whether it go running or go to a sporting event.
In a statement on the Boston attack, a Bank of America Chicago Marathon spokesperson said, "We are deeply saddened, and our focus is on the victims and their families." Joining us to talk about that and other trending topics are today's guests. Alyssa Fraden, co-president of the Performers Union SAG-AFTRA Chicago Local; Bishop Carlton Pearson, founder and executive director of New Dimension Chicago; and Carol Fowler, vice president of content for Viewpoints.com. Hello and welcome.
Thank you, sir.
You heard that defiant tone, Alyssa, from the runners along Chicago's lakefront. Is that the right attitude for Chicagoans?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We have to live life. So it was extremely tragic, and it was scary, and it was sad, and it brought back a lot of memories for me from where I was almost 13 years ago, and I have to get up and go on and move on. So I have to look at every event. With our Bank of America Marathon, I would say we would show up probably more so, and more runners will then sign up at the next marathon just to show their strength.
Should Chicago change anything about the way it handles big public events because of what happened in Boston?
Absolutely. Intensify proactive preparation for any event. Surveillance, cameras, checking the streets in advance, having plainclothes officers. We should be suspicious, but not paranoid.
Carol, we have so many of these events in Chicago. Not only the marathons, we have Lollapalooza and Taste of Chicago and Ravinia, and you could go on and on. Is there any way to really protect the public from something like this?
I don't think so, but we have to keep living. And I think one thing that a lot of people don't focus on, particularly as it pertains to the marathon, is the millions of dollars it raises for charity. In the Boston Marathon, there were more than 30 charities directly benefit. They get most of the money from that one event and the sponsorship of the runners. This isn't like an NFL game or a Cubs game. This is an event that's absolutely integral to the community, but for the larger economy of Chicago and, you know, the not-for-profits. So it must go on, but you learn from your lessons.
So what are the lessons? What do we learn? And anybody, please feel free to jump in.
I would say that we have gone through patterns of security. We started out very secure, where we were at, what was it, code orange all the time, and then we ended up having be at the airport 2 hours. Now, nobody talks about codes. We go to the airport, 45-minute clearance. Take off your shoes, and if you're of one age, older or younger, you don't have to do it. Not that I think we're getting lax, but I think it's becoming part of who we are. We're just becoming people who, all right, I'll empty all my pockets, I'll go through that detector, whatever it is, whether it's X-ray, metal, and we're fine with it. Check my bag. Yeah, I'm happy to let you check my bag. So with public events that are open on the street, there isn't a whole lot we can do. So I would say that we have to just be more vigilant as individuals and not laxed, because I'm sure that, like the TSA, they're not laxed, or our police officers, they're not laxed.
I think by the same token, though, there should be a lot of scrutiny on the city of Boston. Did it do everything it could have to prevent this attack? We don't know enough about how it came to be. And
one of the things we're already hearing are these garbage cans and newspaper boxes. And
I mean,
some cities think that they ought to be just...
I know, I just got back from London, and there are no garbage cans. When I was walking around the streets, I was like,
there shouldn't be.
London got rid of garbage cans a long time ago.
With that paper bag so conspicuously set beside a garbage can, surveillance cameras, security, Homeland Security, they should have noticed that by now, especially since 2011. The other thing is, what you make the issue, you make the idol. I think the media amplifies it so much, and it's so in our face till copycat events take place almost every time.
But the media can't ignore something like an attack on the Boston Marathon. There's no way to play that down.
Well,
it's too big.
Well, but the tendency is to play it up, and a certain amount of it should be played up, but if you keep it in our face, there's too many mentally ill people who are on the streets. They're not in institutions that are funded by the government.
I don't know you're ever going to be able to do anything with that.
Not completely, not completely. You know.
I think the story has to be out there. I think it should be. You know, we've all seen a lot of disclaimers. These images are too graphic. I think we need to see the graphic images. I don't think it can be sanitized. I think this is yet another wake-up call that we aren't safe. You know, you have to live every day as though, unfortunately, it could be your last. We have to approach events like the Chicago Marathon. There will be lessons learned from Boston. Perhaps it could have been preventable. Perhaps there was nothing they could have done, but that analysis has to take place.
Well, while we're talking about running and races, we have to move on to the political desk here in Chicago. And the president of the Teachers Union, Karen Lewis, has announced a plan to basically go after the mayor, Rahm Emanuel, and his allies, raising money and training candidates and so on. Bishop, is this what the president of a teachers union ought to be doing, playing this kind of politics?
I don't think so. I think that Karen is very active and feisty and gets a lot of attention. I think she's successful in many ways, but the mayor is not only the CEO, he's the CFO indirectly, and the COO, and has to deal with a lot of things. This is an economic issue, not a political issue. And to make it political, I think, takes away from what education needs. our kids are not getting quality education, particularly on the South Side. The low performance schools, the low performance teachers, all that needs to be studied very carefully. And I understand busing. I was in the 60s and I hated it. But in situations where the school performance is bad, the students can't speak. I've been to this town 4 years. I'm finding too many young people who don't even have a command of the language, and they've graduated from high school. So something needs to be done systemically in education.
Alyssa, does the mayor have something to worry about here?
You know, look, I'm not sure about the mayor, but I would say that I disagree with your point, because Karen Lewis is a leader of a very large public local union. And she has to, like any corporation or any lobbying group, you are going to have an agenda, and you are going to want to have political allies placed within your, from dog catcher on up, getting you to get your agenda passed. And her agenda does have to do with, yes, her members, but also with the communities and the kids. And if the mayor is not addressing that, to close 50+ schools on one day, basically, without the transition, when you see statistically that these schools are just not surviving in their communities, and then the communities fail, and the charter schools aren't the solution, and closing them all are not the solution. What happens when you have vacant buildings in these, impoverished neighborhoods? This is a terrible, terrible solution. And I think Karen Lewis
it's a huge issue, but Carol, the thing is it enough to build a power base? And do you see Karen Lewis here trying to be a candidate or a power broker?
Well, I have to say, first of all, I admire her moxie.
Yes.
She's got that. No question about that.
There are not many people in the city of Chicago who would call a news conference and say, Mayor Emanuel, I'm digging you on. So let's just say that. I will say, from my own perspective, I volunteer at a school in the Englewood neighborhood, Wentworth Grade School. I'm involved with a mentoring program for young girls in that school. And I was shocked when I first got involved that there were only 30 students in the 8th grade. And I'm like, this school takes up almost an entire city block.
That's the point.
It is enormous. There's an entire 3rd floor that's just gorgeous. It's like an attic that isn't even used. They're trying to raise funds to turn it into like a rec center for the kids. But my point is, what do you do about that? You know, the school was built for like 800 kids. There are maybe 350.
Well, the election is in 2015, so it's going to be interesting to see if the issue carries until then. We have to make our weekly trip down to Springfield, and yesterday the House passed the medical marijuana bill. It still has to go to the Senate. It would instill some rather strict controls, but legalize medical marijuana. Thoughts?
I'm all for it.
I talk to my doctor friends, and it's mandatory. I think it's ultimately going to happen all over the country, but Chicago should be one of the leaders. Illinois should be one of the leading states on that regard.
You know, and funny, it's in other states, certainly in California and Colorado, it's become kind of a joke, because doctors are well known who will write these scripts. People can go in, and basically anybody who wants it can get it. Carol, do you think these controls are going to prevent that?
I think it's a bad idea, and I'll tell you why. You mentioned California, but my problem with it is a little bit more philosophical. I think it's a shiny object. I think Illinois is absolutely wasting its time debating medical marijuana. Not that I don't have compassion for the people who are in pain and want access to it and so on and so forth. We're facing a financial catastrophe right now. We are in a catastrophe with our pension.
What does that have to do with medical marijuana?
It has nothing to do with medical marijuana. My point is, they're spending time talking about issues like this when they ought to be sitting down and spending time figuring out our financial mess that we're in. We just heard, the segment before talking about Illinois leads the nation in mental health cuts. That's what they ought to be addressing.
But for people who are suffering pain, there was an emotional speech from State Representative
I don't trust
Patricia
the state
Mell,
of Illinois
who talked about the pain that people are in and how that she thinks this can alleviate some suffering.
Look, I don't think the state has any credibility right now. I wouldn't trust the state to organize a picnic, much less monitor you know, and launch an entire new program.
But what about that point?
I'm going to disagree with you, Carol, because I would never vilify a group of people who are trying to be not progressive necessarily, but compassionate. And so to have the regulations and strict regulations, a number of dispensaries, a number of people who can actually grow it, and then have it be controlled that way. Marijuana statistically is less addictive than alcohol and cigarettes, and people have to be of a certain age. And this, locally and in the state, we tax the heck out of that stuff.
So this could be an answer to some of the
with regulation, but
another way to raise
and monitoring.
And so you could tax it if you wanted to, and help your state with the economic issue. But that's not the point. I think the point that Debbie Mel was making was to make sure that people have access not to become addicted to painkillers and narcotics,
which
but
they
lead
already are.
Right, but lead a quality life.
We have
with
to leave it there
marijuana.
because we are unfortunately running out of time. Thank you so much, Alyssa Frieden, Bishop Carlton Pearson, and Carol Fowler. From Frank Lloyd Wright to Louis Sullivan, Chicago is known for its architecture, but have you ever wondered who built the city's first non-wooden structure? That's the question one WBEZ listener posed in this week's Curious City.
I'm Sharzi Goharder Rakshan. I'm 17 years old and I live in Naperville. My question is, what was the first non-wooden building to be built in the city of Chicago?
I'm Tim Samuelson, and I'm the cultural historian for the city of Chicago. First official non-wood building would be the Powder Magazine at Fort Dearborn, and it would have been erected somewhere in the period after 1803 and somewhere between that and 1880. You had to have a masonry building to keep your gunpowder in because it has a tendency to go kaboom. So amidst this early fort in the middle of the swamps of Chicago, there was a powder magazine. This was done by the United States government and Captain Whistler, who actually came and supervised the construction of the fort, bringing in the men and the materials to create it.
To learn more about Curious City, log on to our website, WYCC.org. Vote on the story that most interests you, then tune in to In the Loop. We'll put the story with the most votes on the air. Thanks for tuning in this week. You are now In the Loop. The conversation continues now on WYCC.org. I'm Chris Bury.
And I'm Barbara Pinto. We'll see you next week. Good night.